Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are and whenever you are watching this. Today's deep dive is a look at the prime ministerial landscape of Great Britain. On the screen in front of you, you will see probably one of the most famous doorways in the world, number 10 Downing Street. And since the Brexit vote, it seems that number 10 Downing Street has a revolving door. The prime ministerial changes seem to happen more times than changing underwear in hot weather, so let's get down to it. It's probably going to be a long one, so grab a coffee and relax. So we start off with David Cameron. David Cameron wanted to put an end once and for all to the debate of the UK staying or leaving the European Union. On the 23rd of June, the UK went out to vote leave. Cameron had basically put all his eggs in one basket and put all his money on black that the UK would stay within the European Union. Overnight on the 23rd of June to the 24th of June, it became very quickly apparent the UK was doing the exact opposite and voted to leave the EU. Instead of sticking around, Cameron quickly came out the door of number 10 and stated his intention to resign on the morning of the 24th of June. Later in the next month, in mid-July, Cameron officially tendered his resignation to the Queen and Theresa May took over. The thing with Theresa May during the Brexit campaign, she was in the Remain camp. So almost immediately, scepticism was raised that how can you have a leave-oriented Prime Minister negotiate a deal with Brexit? That scepticism was slowly but surely about to come true. On the 5th of September, May made her famous speech where Brexit meant Brexit. And on the 2nd of October, announced plans to trigger Article 50 by March 2017. On the 29th of March 2017, she formally triggered Article 50. Opinion polls bolstered May into her next surprise move. Like Cameron, she put all her eggs in one basket and put all her money on red and formally triggered a snap general election so she could get a stronger mandate for Brexit, which was her explanation. On the 8th of June, all the money on red turned out to be a duff bet because this ball stopped on black. The election backfires massively and results in a hung parliament, forcing Theresa May to go into a deal with the DUP. Instantly, this garnered controversy because the devolution leaders in opposition warned that it shattered the mandate as Britain's role as a neutral arbiter in the Northern Ireland peace process, or the Good Friday Agreement as it is also known. Scotland and Wales also projected strongly that the deal violated fair funding rules and the DUP's policies, which are deeply, deeply conservative on the likes of same-sex marriage and legal abortion, triggered public backlash and reprisals and protests from progressive factions within her own party. The DUP deal, this was basically a confidence and supply vote, which gave the Conservative Party the critical backing of the DUP's 10 MPs to secure the minority for the government's survival. It was quickly labelled as bribery or a downright bung. It was quite costly to the Conservatives, 1 billion in new money, 500 million in pre-allocated funds. Theresa May also had to make concessions and was forced to scrap the pensions triple lock plans and the plans to limit the winter fuel payments to appease the DUP's working class votes. For this cost, the DUP pledged to vote with the Conservatives in all motions of confidence, Queen's Speech, budgets and finance bills, and agreed to support the government on all primary legislatory related votes to national security and the UK's departure from the EU. Now, with all of this, the DUP had an absolute red line which would not be crossed. That red line was the Northern Ireland would not and must not be treated any different to the rest of the UK. This is where the nails in Theresa May's coffin starts to get hammered in at speed. So on the 6th of July, Theresa May went to Chequers and took the cabinet with her and presented her plan for Brexit. Between the 8th and the 9th, there was a cabinet mutiny because she was accused of trying to negotiate a soft Brexit. Boris Johnson and David Davis resigned in protest. On the 14th of November, the UK and EU agree a formal withdrawal agreement from the EU. A second wave of resignations soon follow in protest. In the 12th of December, Leave voting backbenchers trigger a no confidence vote. Again, accusing May of trying to negotiate a soft Brexit. She survives this no confidence vote by 200 to 117. So the DUP come into this when May negotiated a withdrawal agreement. It was with an all UK backstop with special regulations to Northern Ireland. Instantly, the DUP felt betrayed and was absolutely furious, and then locked horns with May, which got nowhere, and the DUP decided to join the Tories in voting down the deal. On the 15th of January, the House of Commons rejects May's Brexit deal in the largest parliament defeat for a sitting British government in recorded history. That vote figure was 432 to 202. The 12th of March, May goes back to Parliament with another deal. Parliament rejects that second deal emphatically by 149 votes. The 27th of March was the original scheduled date of Brexit. May returned to Parliament with yet another deal for the third time, and typically it was rejected. It was getting to the point where she couldn't appease the Remain camp or the Leave camp. May then has to go back to the EU, cap in hand, for an extension. So this extension was to avoid the UK leaving with a no deal exit. On the 23rd of May, there is votes for the European Parliament. This was an absolute catastrophe for Theresa May. The Conservatives ended up in 5th place. At the time, it was their worst ever election result for 185 years. This basically put the final nail in the coffin of Theresa May's premiership. The historic low voting turnout for the Conservatives was between 8.8% and 9.1%, and it was the first time in the party's history that they scored under 10% in a UK-wide election. In a further embarrassment to May, her own parliamentary seat of Maidenhead was lost to the Lib Dems. Not good. Over the weekend, as the numbers came out from the election, May's intention to resign solidified into an immediate resignation plan. It was at this moment that any future leaders of the Conservatives decided to start looking towards a much more hardline approach to Brexit to shore up the vote and win back voters. On the 24th of May, May delivered her famous speech of her breaking down in tears and resigning. On the 24th of July, Boris Johnson wins the leadership race and May tends her resignation to Queen Elizabeth. Now we are on to Boris Johnson, and this is going to be a long one. On the 24th of July, Johnson takes office, and on the 28th of August, one of Johnson's first controversies rears its head when he prorogues Parliament. Johnson prorogued Parliament basically to buy time and to stop any legislation getting through that would dilute his deal. The UK Supreme Court later ruled that it was unlawful. The 3rd of September, he loses his working majority when Philip Lee crosses a flaw. And on the 17th of October, reaches a revised Brexit deal with EU. On the 12th of December, Johnson calls a snap general election and wins with an 80-seat majority. On the 31st of January 2020, Britain was officially out of the EU, followed closely on the 23rd of March, by the first COVID lockdown. In 2021, a third national lockdown is implemented, and in April, another controversy rears its head when Johnson's funding investigation into the Downing Street renovations comes up. So this particular scandal was called the Cash for Curtain scandal. What happened is normally Britain's prime ministers receive up to £30,000 a year for maintenance and refurbishments of the living quarters. Johnson goes well above this budget at 200k, with the most famous item on the inventory is the wallpaper in gold of £840 per roll. The funding was secretly channelled. The Cabinet Office paid the bills initially, but £52,000 of £58,000 was subsequently covered by Lord Brownlow, a party payer and donor through party funds, without public declaration. Due to the scrutiny, Lord Geit found in 2001 that there was no conflict of interest, although he did add that he behaved unwisely by not being more rigorous about who funded the project. Johnson claimed he knew absolutely nothing about it until it hit the media. The Electoral Commission in December 21 delivered its scathing report, and fining the Conservative Party £17,800 for not properly declaring the donation, which ended up with Boris Johnson repaying the bill out of his own pocket. WhatsApp messages then became public, which blew Johnson's story of "I knew nothing" out of the water, because there was messages from November 2020 that showed Johnson was messaging Brownlow personally, asking for more money for the refurb of the flat. Again, blowing the story out of the water. So, November 21 of the same year, the Owen Paterson lobbying scandal and Johnson's botched attempt to overhaul the standards resulted in a catastrophic breakdown of party discipline. So, the Owen Paterson scandal, Paterson had repeatedly used his position to lobby government on behalf of two companies that were paying him £110,000 per year. A cross-party Common Standards Commission recommended a 30-day suspension. A suspension of this magnitude would automatically trigger a by-election. Instead of going with it, Johnson ordered the party to vote against the suspension with a strict three-line whip. A strict three-line whip is a mandatory vote where you vote with the government, and if you don't, you're basically cast out into the cold. So Johnson went with this line. He wanted to block the suspension and completely dismantle the independent standards system, replacing it with a Tory majority committee to review Paterson's case. The the public outrage was immediate. Johnson U-turns in 24 hours. He later abandoned the plans completely. After basically being left out in the cold, Patterson resigns, not before firing a broadside at the whole process. The by-election was a massive slap in the face to the Tories, with the Lib Dems taking Owen Patterson's seat, which the Tories had held for 200 years, with a 23,000 voter swing. This absolutely shattered the trust in his MPs. The forced vote and then the U-turn a day later was the beginning of the end of Johnson's premiership, as his MPs were fast becoming disenfranchised with Team Johnson. 3 weeks after this, with his MPs feeling disenfranchised and basically being left out in the cold and worrying about whether they could trust the party, the leaks about Partygate start trickling out to the media. Again, public outrage was swift and brutal, given that the public were forced to say goodbye to dying relatives via iPads. Strict social isolation rules were meted out against the general British public, with fines and threat of imprisonment. The more it went on and the more it got leaked about Partygate, the more the public outrage was compounded. Report of suitcases filled with alcohol, Downing Street gardens getting trashed, Johnson basically saying he knew nothing about parties, then saying he knew about them but didn't attend. Basically, U-turn after U-turn after U-turn until he finally admitted, yes, I was part of them. On the 12th of April, the Metropolitan Police fined Johnson and Rishi Sunak for breaking the COVID regulations, Johnson becoming the first ever sitting Prime Minister in British history to have found to have been broken the law. This goes on throughout the summer, culminating in a vote of no confidence on the 6th of June. Johnson survived it, but 41% of the party voted against him. Again, Partygate, the Owen Patterson scandal and the cash for curtain scandal, plus Johnson's numerous other scandals before hitting office, weren't far away from the public eye and used in Prime Minister's questions to beat him over the head with. On the 5th of July, the Chris Pincher scandal unfolds. Chris Pincher was alleged and accused of groping men in the House of Commons bar, and it turns out that Downing Street admits it knew of previous allegations of sexual misconduct before appointing him as chief whip. This comes out, it set off a massive domino effect that even Boris Johnson cannot stop. Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid resign in protest within minutes of each other on the same night. From then, the wave of resignations was historic. There was over 50 in 48 hours, to the point where when Johnson was at a committee hearing, he was asked the question, do you even have enough ministers to replace the ones that have resigned? On the 7th of July, Johnson realises he has run out of road and is backed into a corner that he can't escape, and resigns. On the 6th of September, he officially tenders his resignation, and Liz Truss comes into the fray. Liz Truss has the unfortunate legacy of being outlasted by a lettuce. One of the stalwart tabloid red tops in the UK, the Daily Star, once it became apparent that her reign probably wouldn't be lasting by the end of the year, made a tongue-in-cheek story of comparing whether a lettuce would survive her leadership. So on the 5th of September, Truss wins the leadership race, and by the 6th of September, she's officially appointed Prime Minister. On the 8th of September, Queen Elizabeth II dies, pushing government and political debate to the back of the agenda for 10 days, while the UK acknowledges 10 days of official national mourning. Basically, government, business and political debate was officially closed for that 10 days. On the 23rd of September, whilst working behind closed doors, Kwasi Kwarteng, her Chancellor, unveils his mini budget, featuring 45 billion of unfunded tax cuts, including abolishing 45 pence top rate of income tax for high earners. At the time, plenty of commentators were coming out and saying it was the best Conservative budget they have ever seen, until 3 days later, on the 26th of September, the money markets decided it wasn't, and carnage ensued. The pound crashed against the dollar, and the government yield skyrocketed, threatening pension funds. Interest rates go through the roof. Homeowners, after years of low interest rates, when their deals came up to remortgage their homes, realised that it was actually probably going to be unaffordable and was stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the 28th of September, the Bank of England intervened with emergency 65 billion bond buying programme to try and restore the market stability. In this time, Truss is absolutely lambasted for playing so fast and loose with national finances that on the 3rd of October she executed a major U-turn, abandoning the 45 pence income tax rate cut completely. On the 14th of October, Kwarteng unexpectedly flies back from America to be told he is sacked. Liz Truss made him her fall guy, and he is replaced with Jeremy Hunt, who immediately indicates that the core tenets of Liz Truss's economic strategy will be reversed. 3 days later, that comes true and reverses all tax cuts. Truss now is effectively a Prime Minister in name only, and the clock is ticking. On the 19th of October, Suella Braverman resigns over a data breach, but delivers a broadside against the Truss government. Later in the evening, a vote on fracking dissolves into absolute chaos, and the party discipline breaks down. So the fracking vote, the primary driver of the chaos was the contradictory messages from Downing Street. What had happened? Labour had introduced a motion to ban fracking. Many Conservative MPs opposed fracking. Downing Street declared the vote a strict three-line whip and also a vote of confidence in Truss's premiership. Tory MPs were told that voting against the government would result in loss of party membership. Minutes before the vote began, a minister announced at a dispatch box that it actually wasn't a vote of confidence any longer. Hours after the vote, Downing Street backtracked again, stating it had in fact been a vote of confidence and threatened disciplinary action to those who voted against the government. At the actual vote itself, it was played out in public that there was physical confrontations, with reports of MPs being dragged through doors in tears, whips and senior ministers reportedly physically jostling, cornering and screaming at wavering Tories. The Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, and her Deputy, Craig Whitaker, resigned on the spot, with Whitaker saying, I am fucking furious and don't give a fuck anymore. Hours after the vote, the government couldn't confirm nor deny it had an effective whip system. However, both were reportedly pressured into staying in the roles. Despite the pressure from the whips and senior ministers, 40 Tories refused to vote with the government. One of the famous interviews after the vote was a Tory MP publicly slating the party, Charles Walker, publicly saying he was furious and sick of talentless people ticking the right boxes, not for the country's interest, but for their own interest. This fractured discipline and the absolute chaos proved to the party and to the country that Liz Truss had absolutely no authority left. And in a conversation with the 1922 committee's chief, Graham Brady, it was basically spelled out to her that the game was up. The day after the chaotic vote, Truss intends to resign, and on the 25th of October she is officially gone after only 49 days in office. However, her tenure probably would have been even less had it not been for the Queen dying and the 10 days of national mourning, because if the Queen hadn't have died, chances are she would have introduced her mini budget a lot sooner, and the same chain of events would have just happened a lot sooner. After that, it is Rishi Sunak's turn to go through the revolving door. On the 25th of October 22, he was appointed Prime Minister, and he basically came in on the promise that he was the change in government that was drastically needed. He confronted early cabinet ethics scandals in November, and Gavin Williamson resigned over bullying. On the 6th of December, he conceded a backbench pressure to lifting bans on new wind farms. Then we go forward to the 21st of April 23. Dominic Raab resigns after a bullying investigation. On the 20th of September, the U-turns begin with a U-turn on the net zero targets, and on the 4th of October scrapped the northern leg of the HS2 to much public outrage from the north. On the 13th of November, he sacked his Home Secretary Suella Braverman, and David Cameron made a surprise comeback to government as Foreign Secretary. In the midst of all this, Sunak decided to bring up a refugee scheme for Rwanda, that UK illegal immigrants were transported to Rwanda, and the UK Supreme Court immediately ruled that it was unlawful. From January to April 24, he battled deep party divisions on his Rwanda Act, and it was passed in late April. On the 22nd of May, in between all that, the controversies of his wife still having business dealings with Russia, all topped up to his eventual downfall. And on the 22nd of May, as is typical with Tory prime ministers of the time, all his eggs went into one basket and put all his money on red and called a surprise general election. So Sunak's reasoning for this, on the morning he called the election, the UK inflation had dropped to 2.3%, which was close to the Bank of England's target, which hadn't been there for over 3 years. The fear was that if he waited until the autumn to call the election, he would see it creep back up. And given his Rwanda plan had been passed in the late April, there was a threat of a small boat crossing surge, which again, if you waited till August, to the autumn, this was putting his plan in danger. The thought of going for the 22nd of May to call the election was that he could campaign on the premise that his Rwanda pledge was passed, and it was him that got it through Parliament. On the 4th of July, the Tories were wiped out up and down the country. And the morning after, Sunak resigns. Are we keeping up yet? Because there's still more. So, once Sunak had resigned, it was now Keir Starmer's turn to become Prime Minister, ending 14 years of Conservative rule with a 400-seat majority. It wasn't long before his first controversies and U-turns came to fore. First off was the winter fuel payment. His Chancellor Rachel Reeves, her plans was to strip it from 10 million pensioners. Again, public outcry was swift, as was the party fury, which caused it to be watered down so that pensioners earning over 35k were the only ones who lost it. More U-turns came. The two-child benefit cap, a very contentious issue in UK politics, with both camps equally fierce in their desire to keep it and their desire to scrap it. Starmer maintained it for 6 months, and the backbench rebellion of Labour MPs forced Labour to scrap it altogether at a cost of £3 billion. Again, strong opinions on both sides for keeping and for scrapping. Again, this was yet another nail in Starmer's coffin. One of his other U-turns was on welfare. The government had initially planned a sweeping overhaul to restrict personal independence payments, or PIP as it is known, and universal credit to drive down welfare spending. Again, due to public outcry and public outrage and a 49 Labour MP rebellion, it was totally abandoned. Again, another U-turn, another nail in the coffin. The cancelling of local elections in early 2026. Downing Street caused uproar by moving to postpone local elections in 30 council areas. Again, after much public outcry and party fury, Starmer again U-turned. Another nail in his coffin. Farmers' inheritance tax. Starmer faced rural protests up and down the country by planning to cut inheritance tax exemptions to agricultural property. Due to, again, much public outcry and public rage from the farmers and support of the farmers, it was watered down heavily and walked back on that only 15% of farmers' properties would have to pay inheritance tax. Another nail in Starmer's coffin was the explicit manifesto pledge to not raise income tax. Guess what he did? He raised it. One of the most contentious issues in UK politics at the moment, and has been for the last few years, is the grooming gangs inquiry. This is something that is much clung to by the Reform Party, Restore UK Party, and other right-wing agitators. 6 months of blocking opposition and campaign demands for a national inquiry, with Starmer saying local approaches should be used to inquire about the grooming gangs. A damning and rapid review by Louise Casey completely reversed his course again, and he has now launched a national inquiry. So the U-turns after U-turns, they have slowly but surely put the nails in Starmer's coffin. Mid to late 25, hit by severe war-induced inflation and rising energy costs due to conflict in Iran. He receives praise for navigating the relationship with Donald Trump, maintaining the aid for the Ukraine and repairing EU ties. The domestic pressure mounts on him. September 25, the ghost of the Jeffrey Epstein files and Peter Mandelson's ever-growing talent to fuck up whatever he touches comes to bite Starmer on the arse. Starmer appointed Mandelson as ambassador to Washington, with many in the party going, what the hell, given Mandelson's past performances and resignations and controversies. When a latest tranche of Epstein files were unsealed by the US government, it showed that Mandelson and Epstein were much more closer than Mandelson had said he was, which caused an absolute headache for Starmer. Given Starmer was so brutal against Johnson with the Chris Pincher scandal, it made Starmer look like a massive hypocrite, and Mandelson basically put another nail in the coffin. Due to the ongoing rumbling of the Mandelson and Epstein file scandal, Morgan McSweeney and Tim Allen resign from government. The next big test of Starmer's leadership was the local elections. This was seen as basically a test of whether he could survive, with many saying that if Labour got wiped out in the elections, then Starmer should go. It went how it was predicted. Labour had catastrophic losses up and down the country, with Reform making gains and basically grabbing onto the fact that Starmer was a useless leader. In mid-May, the coordinated coup begins. Wes Streeton resigns, and a backbench MP by the name of Josh Simmons resigns his seat to engineer a by-election vacancy for Andy Burnham. Starmer's reign erodes further as talk comes about Burnham being the next Prime Minister. Starmer ends up being a bit like Liz Truss in that his reign is by name only. On the 11th of June, Starmer releases defence budget, and his Defence Secretary John Healey and Armed Forces Minister Al Kearns resign over defence spending, with both citing nowhere near enough spent to defend the nation in the face of its current issues. Al Kearns citing that a Northern Ireland legacy protocol that's meant to protect veterans from ended up in court, was basically bending them over and shafting them. Mid-June, Burnham wins the by-election. This is now glass of whiskey and revolver territory for Starmer. Burnham's win was by a massive margin, and he is now in place to be Starmer's ready successor. Starmer then goes to Chequers for a weekend with his family and close aides, and after much heart-to-heart and much deliberation, Starmer knows he's facing a rebellion and a leadership challenge which he has no hope of winning, because he is basically one of the UK's most unpopular leaders ever. He decides that it is game over. 17th of July, Burnham wins the leadership contest uncontested, and on the 20th of July, Starmer officially resigns and Burnham is in. So there we have it. Not a massively comprehensive look, but a look all the same at the British political landscape. As you can see, now we have Burnham. There feels that there is a little bit of calm in the UK political scene. However, he is probably going to be one of the most watched and scrutinised prime ministers in recent history, because the slightest foot wrong he puts, he will basically hand the keys to the next general election to Nigel Farage. So all in all, a complete clusterfuck of British politics from Brexit to now, and hopefully now things will settle down, but given the UK political landscape, I wouldn't count on it. Like I said, the slightest foot wrong that Burnham puts and his time will be ticking. Given that Labour have put all their eggs in one basket with Burnham, he is basically their last chance saloon. And an interesting thing of note for Andy Burnham is that anyone who had the slightest scintilla of knowledge to Keir Starmer, as soon as Burnham came into Downing Street, he went through the cabinet like a scythe, letting those with even the slightest scintilla of loyalty to Starmer and showing them the door. So yeah, possibility of what's next. Burnham actually does a decent job and, leads Labour to victory in the next election. Another possibility is Burnham completely makes a hash of it, sends a country further into despair, into death spiral, and hands the keys to number 10 to Nigel Farage at the next election. Who knows? Chances are over time between now and then there'll be another deep dive on British politics, so stick with it. Hope you're well, and goodbye.